very enthusiastic
Yeah,
people over there.
you're stealing my question. I was gonna. All right. Second question, I guess. How many of you were at our second meetup where Reuven gave a talk about content model changes done the right way? I think I recognize a few of you. That was in this space back in January. All right, no, you were at the meetup. Cool, perfect. So for you, so I'm here to talk about content testing and deployment done the right way. But for those of you that were at the previous meetup, you should think of this talk as content modeling done the right way, part 2. So, so I'm Shai. I'm a developer evangelist at Contentful. I've been at Contentful since January. This is my first time speaking in London. So I expect that y'all are going to be really mean and scare me away so I never come back. So for those of you that didn't kind of make it to our meetup where we talked about content modeling, I'm going to spend a couple minutes kind of giving you the TLDR of that talk, or the TLDS, too long didn't see. So with building software, nobody gets it right the first time. I've probably done it once or twice, but I've never spent time, writing code and having it compile immediately without having to fix bugs. And I've never, made a database in a certain way where that was perfect. So when you can't have perfection, the next best thing you can have is change. What could go wrong when the boss asks you to make a production change on Friday? So in the past, we talked about the Contentful migration CLI. And so just to kind of recap, that CLI is a command line tool that lets you create content types, delete content types, edit content types, create, edit, or delete fields, change the IDs of those fields, and it lets you do that all in JavaScript. So it's all dynamic, it's all programmable, it's all, you can reuse those migration files, and you can kind of keep working and keep trying them until you get it right. This is really great because it's repeatable, it lets you practice, it lets you kind of see what the content model change is going to be before you do it. You can track it, you can check it into GitHub, and so you get to keep this file, send it to your coworkers, code review it. It gives you a heads up explicitly of what it's going to do, which I think lets you kind of have a sanity check. And yeah, since it's a CI tool, you can use the command line to do it rather than the web app. I think that's pretty nice. But what if I want to kind of throw away that migration? What if I run a migration and I never want to use it again? What then? So our latest kind of thing that we've just launched pretty recently that I'm really excited about is space environments. And kind of similar to the way that you do things with GitHub, it lets you clone, or in this case, kind of branch off that master repository, that kind of God mode, I guess. They let you create these multiple environments, these kind of multiple versions of the space, and mess with them in isolation. So you can run those, you can clone your master, do some testing, run it against run your migrations against that kind of new space. It doesn't work for you, you just trash the space, re-clone it, and do whatever. That's really great, I think, for local development. It makes it really easy to kind of make sure that your code changes aren't kind of affecting anything. It lets you work with your website without having to deploy your content model changes to production, which previously folks would have different spaces for their content models, staging, a QA, a dev space. Now this can all be done in that same master space, and you can spin up a copy of your most recent master extremely easily. And then the last thing I think you can do with this is continuous integration. And that's really what I'm here to talk to you about, continuous integration, and the idea of kind of checking in your code and constantly being able to run tests and constantly evaluate your code and make sure that things are sane and things are working. So for those of you that have never used kind of continuous integration before or haven't been exposed to kind of that philosophy, typically what it would look like is you push your code onto GitHub, and a continuous integration provider is going to pick that up, whether it be Circle CI or Travis or some other thing out there. That service is going to build your code. It's going to download all of your dependencies. It's going to go ahead and test your code. So it'll run whatever testing suite you have in there, whether it be PyTest, which is what I use, or anything else. If all your tests pass, then it's going to go ahead and deploy it, whether that's to a staging environment or to a master environment, or even potentially you have deployment based on each individual branch. So the Contentful Contentful CLI tool, what you can do to integrate that kind of workflow into your pipeline is when you do that build, it's also going to go ahead and spin up a copy of the master space. So every time you build your space, or every time you build your code, it's going to spin out a new space. It's going to go ahead and run those migration scripts that you have checked into the repository against that space. It's going to test that, and so you can check in your new tests and your expectations against that new space. And then if everything works, it's going to deploy it. And as part of that deployment, it's also going to run those migration changes against the master space. So your production code is running, on the most updated version of your content model on Contentful. So I've been spending the last couple of weeks kind of playing around with this idea of like, how can we do this using Contentful? How can I bring this into kind of the software development process? So I've been working a lot with Circle CI. They just pushed out version 2.0, kind of their workflow tools, and so I've been messing around with it. And in terms of the building and the testing process, integrating this in was actually, I think, fairly simple. I'd not used Circle CI prior to kind of working on this project, and for me, adding it in was just adding a simple stage for preparing the environment for testing, which it does kind of right there, and then running the tests, and then on the deployment stage, doing something similar, adding in a step as part of that to run the migration and update the master environment. So the way that Circle CI works is it expects this kind of config.yml file, and it kind of goes down a list of instructions that you give it within each step. So a build step, might have a check out the latest version of the environment, download the latest, or see if the dependencies have updated. If they haven't, download the dependencies. And in this case, I've added a step for preparing the environment for testing. So what it does is it activates my Python environment. I have a Python file that runs my migration, and I have it run for every branch on GitHub. So it creates a new environment for every single pull request, which I think is really powerful. And then it uses our Contentful migration tool to run those migrations against those new spaces. And something cool that Circle CI lets you do is it lets you kind of dynamically decide what things are being done. So I'm passing in variables for just the branch names. And then in my migration script, all I'm doing is I'm connecting to the Contentful management Python client, and then I'm running, adding a new environment named whatever variable that I passed in. That gets spun up and created on Contentful. Inside Contentful, I'm doing some version tracking. So I don't know if any of you have used kind of automated database tools. As a Python dev, I do a lot of work with Alembic. And Alembic has this really nice kind of version tracking inside it. So when you spin up Alembic for the first time, it attaches a new table that the only thing in that table is what version is the database running. So something you can do with Alembic is you can run your migrations, and Alembic will go up the tree until it finds, okay, if I'm running version 7 and I expect it to run to version 10, I can back up to migration 9, back up to migration 8, migration 7, and then run all the way down the tree. So in here, I'm doing something similar. I have a content model of just version tracking. I have one entry of that content model, and then it's just the version number that I'm using. I'm using the kind of 3-number version. And then when Circle CI goes to run the migration, it runs this migration helper file, so I don't need to update or change my Circle script every time I commit code. What this helper file does is it confirms that the migration is actually supposed to happen, because if it shouldn't run. It should just kill the build and trash it, unless I'm explicitly being like, yes, there's a new migration in here. It checks to make sure the versions are kind of matching up. Is the expected version that we are on currently matching the version of Contentful that is out there? If it's not, crash the build. Is this migration that I'm running supposed to be run, not crash the build? And then it goes hunting for migration files. So it looks in my kind of migration folder for the appropriate version. And so all my migration files kind of look like this. So hunt, make sure that the right version is there, and then it'll confirm that that should run. I have a validate function again, just to kind of be overly safe, just to make sure that things aren't happening that shouldn't, confirm that versions are working out as expected, and this kind of migration code is the traditional code that happens when you use the Contentful migration tool, like this. And if that migration, and then it exports kind of the functions so they're accessible to the other JavaScript file. So when it comes time to do my tests, all I do is I pass the environment ID over to PyTest, and then PyTest uses it to connect to the Contentful CLI to make sure it's connecting to the appropriate environment, and it runs the tests. And hopefully, if everything passes, it gets pushed up to the deployment phase. So let's go ahead and actually see what that looks like in practice. So hopefully this works out. So I'm going to do a bit of live coding. Oh. So here we go. So I have up here, this is my, I built kind of an Avengers fan site. So when I started working on this project, we had just seen the Avengers film. And so I built like a pretty basic, like 5-minute, like let's track some characters, let's throw a GIF up there because I like GIFs, and let's just kind of say when they first showed up in a comic book. This is a really basic site. I spun it up very, very quickly. But for kind of just demonstration's sake, let's say I also want to track who the original author that made the comic hero is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my repo. So this is just a kind of simple Python site. You can see there's the Flask code. It uses Contentful to kind of get all of the stuff. And then over on Contentful, I can pull up. So here I have this version number. I have my content with the posts, and so they have all of those things as. So here, when I want to go ahead and actually run this migration, I have a few things that I have to do. So the first thing I need to do is I need to go into my version. I have this done as a JSON file, so my tests can go into that JSON file, and I don't have to necessarily update my test to make sure that it's running on the correct version every time I run it. Word of God is this JSON file. So I'm going to go ahead and bump this up to 0.0.9. I'm going to go ahead and copy my template. And the format here is content underscore migration underscore and the version name. I'm just going to copy this one because that way I don't need to change the whole thing. So I'm going to change this to 9. So now here in this new migration file, the only thing that's different between this and the template is that there's some code in the migration section. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and update the post. I'm going to go ahead and create a field. So it'll be post.create field author. And that field is going to have the name of author. It's going to be of type symbol, which is a short text. And then it is not going to be required. I'm going to make required false. Something I could do here is I could make it actually populate all of those fields. I'm not going to make you sit through watching me try and remember that and then try and debug it when I have a typo. So I'm going to spare you off that. And then the last thing I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to update my tests. So here I have some tests. As part of my test, I assert the number of content fields in the content model. Since I'm updating the content model here, I need to update the number of fields that it expects. And then I'm also going to explicitly call out, does the author field exist? If I filled it in, I could add a test. What's the actual entry for Hawkeye? Who is his author? I'm not that much of a Marvel fan to know that off the top of my head, but let's go ahead and quickly update that. Author. Okay, so that's 3 files that I've changed here to kind of push this migration, and then my continuous integration tool will take care of the rest for me. So I'm going to go ahead and check that all into GitHub. So let me go ahead and first create a new branch. So on that branch, London, this new migration that I just made. Change the version. Great. So now I'm going to go ahead and head over to GitHub. GitHub is going to detect that there's a new branch, so I'm going to go ahead and just make a pull request. As part of that pull request, CircleCI is automatically going to run a build for me. So let's head over to CircleCI. I can click on that, and it will start running. This takes about 50 seconds because it does have to do a full kind of deployment process where it downloads any updated dependencies and does all of that stuff. So it'll take just a bit. I'll complain that the pip version is old. There we go. It's running our tests. It's creating the new environment. So circle testing London. Oh, and I have fucked it up. Okay, let's see what I did. So I fucked it up, so I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my backup rather than making you watch me try and debug it live, because that's no fun. So here we go. I ran this build earlier. So in CircleCI, I have this build from backup if I was bad at live coding. So here, ran the tests. As part of that, it created a new environment, waited until the environment was updated, it updated the API key to allow access, and then it ran the migration. And then over here on the Contentful side, it'll showcase if I go into the environments, some of my settings, and look for my environments. Here's the circle testing backup author feature. And you can see right here that there's a branch that was run for circle testing CF London. So this gets created automatically. Unfortunately, there is no practical, there is a practical way for deleting these branches automatically after the tests are run. I don't do it in case I want to kind of debug and dive into why tests fail. It's definitely something you could do. I know there's certainly limits on the number of environments that you can have, and so if you're constantly spinning up these new environments, you might get close to those features. Something also you could do is maybe run a cron job daily and just confirm, do these branches exist? If they exist, keep the environments. If they don't, then trash them. We don't need them anymore. Automatically delete them. And that's something you can do with our migration tooling. So here it is. This is, it looks like this passed. So I'm going to go ahead and actually just merge it straight into master since it passed. Just squash it. And then CircleCI should automatically go through that build process again, just to confirm that everything is done well. So here it's running. I'm going to show it from the workflow section. This time is also going to do a deployment. So here it builds. Dependencies. There's the environment. Looks like that's successful, so it's going to run the migration. It's going to do the tests. Looks like those pass. So if we go back to the workflow tool, it's started the deploy process, and this is just a very similar kind of thing. It's going to install the dependencies. It's going to run against master, and then it's going to push it up to Heroku. Standard kind of build deployment to Heroku. I don't need to make you sit through that. That's no fun. So this is kind of my hypothetical kind of scenario. I'm going to keep working on this. I think there's some interesting things that I can keep doing on this. One of the fun things that I want to do is also have it spin up a new kind of URL every time a new branch goes live to kind of just give you an automatic version as well. Heroku has some cool features that let you build a new URL kind of for every branch as well. But this is kind of like a theoretical kind of example that I've been working on of how you can practically use our environments in your continuous integration pipeline. I think it's also pretty simple or fairly simple to also add this into kind of your staging and your dev branches. Rather than updating the master URL, it would update the staging environment and the dev environment. In that case, I think the only thing that would change is you would probably trash your staging rather than just running the migration straight against it, just running master. Although that is, I think, fairly up to preference on kind of how you manage that. So I guess kind of just end on this note. Integrating and evolving your content model into your delivery pipeline, I think is something that is now very practical to do now that we have this new environments feature. I hope I've kind of challenged or given you some ideas of how you can potentially do that and how you can make that part of your process. And I've got a live example of this. This code is all up on GitHub, and I'm still kind of making this better and adding kind of more examples into this and kind of more stuff to this as I learn more about continuous integration myself. Eventually, my goal is to throw a Travis kind of version of this up there as well for those of you that use Travis instead of Circle and any other kind of major other continuous integration providers as well. So I think that'll be really helpful to kind of give you an example to get started if you're the person in charge of setting that up for your team or your organization. I'm Shai. It's my Twitter. And I also have a copy of this talk at my GitHub, so github.com/shai/talks. There's a PDF of this up there as well, and it has a link to the example. But that's pretty much it from me. Does anyone have any questions? Hit me.
So when you said it's a content migration API,
Yeah.
actually content type migration API.
Yeah. So you can do all of it. Yeah. You can do content type migrations. You can do actually migration on a field level, so you can change. Like an example is that you could go in and you could split author. Like if you have a full name author, you can split it into like first name, last name, and then dynamically populate those fields inside our migration API as well.
But isn't it actually override, say, depending on content type? Because what kind of test did you have that?
Oh, I just tested to see if it existed. I didn't want to. I could have also written to fill it in as well, and then done a test to double check that it was filled in for the right person. I didn't want to do that because I thought that would have taken a bit of time. I think live coding is kind of boring to watch a little bit sometimes, so I didn't have it do that. But that is definitely something that you can use. You can do with that tool. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah. Cool. Because if you're in a test content type, you're actually testing contentful, so it's like you're testing your application is right now.
No. So that would be an additional part of your testing suite. In this case, I'm only testing kind of the Contentful connection because I don't actually think that the Python app is really that interesting in this scenario. That's not really the cool part about this talk. It's just some random Python app that I just made for the sake of making, so I'd have something to run tests against. But that's not really kind of what's cool. So typically with Python, you would make multiple test files for your different test cases, so like a test_web app or a test_contentful, and your testing suite would just kind of go through all of them until it was finished. But yeah, in that case, you would have to keep updating kind of multiple versions of that testing suite.
When you create a new environment,
yeah,
can you add entries to that environment and only that environment?
Yeah. So the environments are completely isolated. So what you do against those environments stays in those environments. So in this case, I'm spinning up a new environment just for the branch. So it's completely clean against master, and it runs the migration against master, and that only happens to that environment. So then if you want to have it run against master, you'd have to explicitly merge it into the master repo and then run it against the master repo, or you can manually run that migration file against master, but you do have to explicitly say what environment ID you want, and if you don't, it just assumes you want the master environment and runs it against the master environment.
So let's say you choose to merge this environment, you spun it back into master.
Yeah. So merge isn't quite the right word in this case. With GitHub, you have the ability to merge it, and it updates your master with whatever the merge is. In Contentful, what you're doing is you're rerunning the migration scripts that you checked in or that you have against that master environment. So it's not quite as clean as the way Git manages it, but I think it gets pretty close. So if you were using the web app to update your environment, you would then need to go and do the same thing with the web app in the master environment as well, which isn't as repeatable, which is why I would recommend using kind of the command line tool and writing JavaScript for it. Hey, mate.
Do you guys have any plans on having an automated pipeline to sync the content down from one environment to the other?
Off the top of my head, no. We don't have plans for that. We're constantly evolving our roadmap though, and so if you kind of suggest that, we can definitely add it to our list of like suggested features. We do take customer kind of feature requests pretty seriously and try to kind of evaluate how to bring it in. But off the top of my head, I don't believe that's something that we have kind of up and coming. I think our recommended solution would be to use those files and then kind of just rerun the files, rerun the migration scripts that you've written. We look at environments as kind of like disposable things. You can use it to test, and then when you're done with it, you just kill it as well. So I don't think we have the plans to kind of push it back up. And the other thing is, I think the master environments are also constantly changing as well. Authors are adding stuff to it, and that's happening independent of whatever developers are doing. And so, to kind of avoid merge conflicts in that case as well, letting you do it programmatically, I think is really important. Go for it.
Quite like your version,
Yeah.
Do you plan to version the model yourself?
So there is actually versioning in it. It technically versions every time it saves. It's just a single integer. Yeah, everything. It has a single integer, so you can actually revert back down to your previous content as well right now.
So the models themselves follow the scene.
I'm not sure off the top of my head. I would need to take a look at that, but my gut feel is that is something that is in it. We can actually check if you're interested. So where it is in the content type is right there. My expectation is on the content model that will be the same thing. No, it looks like we don't have that. It just looks like we only have that on the content model. Or sorry, on the content itself, not on the content model. So that's what I think one of the nice things about doing it this way is that theoretically you would have track of like all those migration files, and so you could kind of just, similar to the way that you would handle a database. You programmatically update your database, whether it's writing SQL or letting a service like Alembic handle the generation of SQL for you. You still have those files, and you can check those files into GitHub, and you can go up and down kind of that tree as needed. So I don't write SQL against production databases anymore. That was no fun. I much prefer letting a tool handle it for me. So something with a revert function. Are there any more questions? Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking a look at this. Like I said, we're still kind of figuring out or I'm still figuring out kind of this example, and so any feedback that you have, I think will make our examples much stronger. I'd love to hear it. And we're always kind of adding and improving features as well. And so comments like pushing the environments back to kind of the master is actually really helpful because we can use that to make Contentful better. And so if you have any kind of feature wish lists or stuff like that, you can talk to me, and I can make sure that we get it into our list of requests and make sure that we're tracking that stuff as well. That's how we make decisions about what to build, is what you all want. So, awesome. I'm gonna give it back to Mark.